My stepfather smiled when he handed me the mug. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the mug, not the coffee, the smile. He never smiled at me like that, not once in 11 years. I had been back in the house for 3 days. 3 days since I flew in from Calgary to help my mother after her knee surgery. 3 days of sleeping in my old childhood bedroom with the water stain on the ceiling shaped like a boot. Eating at the kitchen table where nobody talked to me directly, but everyone talked around me directly, but everyone talked around me. 3 days of watching my stepfather, Gerald, move through that house like he owned every inch of it. He does own it. That's the problem. Before I tell you what was in that mug and what I did next, drop a comment and tell me, what's the one thing someone in your family did that you will never, ever be able to explain to a normal person? The thing that sounds insane when you say it out loud. I want to read your stories. I should explain what kind of daughter I am. Not the kind you're thinking. I'm not the prodigal child who ran away and came back changed. I left because I had to. I left because staying was making me disappear 1 year at a time. I'm the kind of daughter who still transferred money to my mother's account every month from Calgary. $800. Not because anyone asked, but because the guilt had a specific shape and it fit exactly inside my chest. And the only thing that made it shrink temporarily was watching that transfer confirmation appear on my phone screen. I'm 31. I'm a project coordinator for a construction firm. I've been sober for 4 years, which is relevant because there is a particular cruelty in being offered a spiked drink when the people doing it know your history with substances. I'll get to that. My mother married Gerald when I was 19. She'd been alone for 6 years after my father passed, and I understood. I did. Gerald was charming in the way that certain men are charming, which is to say completely and only in front of other people. He had a landscaping company, 3 grown kids from his first marriage, a house in Barrie with a 2-car garage, and a way of making my mother laugh that I hadn't heard from her since before Dad got sick. What he also had, which I didn't fully understand until much later, was debt, a very specific kind of debt that accumulates when a man is better at appearing successful than actually being it. I found out about the CRA letters on my second night home. My mother was sleeping. Gerald had gone out to check on a job site at 8 p.m., which even I knew wasn't a thing that happened. I went looking for ibuprofen in the kitchen drawer, where my mother keeps every loose piece of paper she's ever received, and I found 3 envelopes. Canada Revenue Agency, all unopened. The last one had a red stripe across the top. I stood in the kitchen in my socks and opened all 3. Gerald owed $340,000 in back taxes and penalties. The house was listed as a secured asset. There was a collection notice threatening to escalate to legal seizure. The final date on the most recent letter was 6 weeks away. I put them back exactly as I found them. I went to bed. I did not sleep. Here's what I want you to understand about me and money. I'm not wealthy. I'm comfortable. I saved aggressively because I spent years being not comfortable, and the fear of going back to not comfortable is the thing that gets me out of bed every morning. I have an RRSP. I have a TFSA with about $280,000 in it that I built over 8 years of not taking vacations I wanted to take and not buying things I wanted to buy. I have a $600,000 life insurance policy through work that I set up when I got promoted 3 years ago. Nobody in my family knows the exact numbers. But Gerald, I realized that night, had been doing the math on me for a while. I know this because the next morning I called my benefits provider for my car with the windows up. I asked them a simple question. Had anyone inquired about my policy recently? There was a pause. The representative said she couldn't share the details of inquiries, but she could confirm that a request had come in from a third party asking about the process for updating a beneficiary on a policyholder's account. She said no changes had been made because the request hadn't come from me. She said I might want to review my policy and contact them if I had any concerns. I thanked her. I sat in the parking lot of the No Frills on Dunlop Street for 40 minutes. Then I went back inside the house and made myself a cup of tea like nothing had happened. That night at dinner, Gerald was attentive in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. He refilled my water glass without being asked. He asked about my job. He said he was glad I was home. My mother beamed across the table like this was the family she'd always wanted, all of us together. Warm kitchen, the smell of the roast she'd been slow cooking since noon. My half-sister, Brooke, arrived late. She's 23, Gerald's biological daughter from his first marriage. She's the one he flew out to Cancun for spring break 2 years ago. She's the one whose car payment my mother quietly covers every month because Gerald is going through a rough patch. Brooke dropped her jacket on the back of a chair, scrolled through her phone for most of dinner, and when she did look up, she looked at me the way she's always looked at me, like on furniture that got rearranged into an inconvenient spot. I don't hate Brooke. I used to. Now I mostly feel tired thinking about her, the way you feel tired about weather. The first crack appeared on day 3. Gerald came into the kitchen in the morning while I was making coffee and said very casually, still looking at his phone, that he'd been thinking. He said it would mean the world to my mother if I considered moving back to Barrie. He said she needed the support. He said Calgary was so far. He said there were good construction firms in Simcoe County. He'd looked into it. I said I'd think about it. He poured himself a coffee and left. The whole exchange took 90 seconds. But I stood at the counter after he was gone, and I thought about the word consider. The way he used it, not suggesting, positioning. He was already building a narrative where me being in Barrie was the obvious, logical, loving thing to do, where leaving was selfish, where staying was just what happened next. I went to my room and I opened my laptop. If you are considering something that might be paranoid and stupid, the best thing to do is try to confirm whether it is paranoid and stupid before you act. So I looked up what happens to a life insurance benefit in Ontario when the policyholder dies without having updated their designated beneficiary. I read about contested claims. I read about what constitutes suspicious circumstance. I read about cases where family members had been charged for staging accidents. I read a CBC article about a man in Mississauga. I wasn't being paranoid. I went to the Canadian Tire on Essa Road that afternoon, and I bought a $45 smart plug with a built-in camera. It looked like any other white electrical adapter. I told my mother the one I used for my CPAP had a loose connection and I needed to replace it. She nodded and went back to her show. I plugged it into the outlet beside the kitchen hutch. The angle covered the counter, the stove, and the kitchen table. I set up the app on my phone in the bathroom with the fan running. Feed came through clear. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, I was supposedly in the shower. I was sitting on the edge of the tub in my housecoat with my phone propped against the shampoo bottles. Gerald came into the kitchen at 7:14 a.m. He looked at the hallway. He looked at the ceiling, the way people do when they're listening for movement upstairs. Then he opened the cabinet above the fridge. He took down a prescription bottle, my mother's prescription bottle, her sleep medication, the one her doctor had given her after the surgery, Zopiclone, which I know because I picked it up from the Shoppers Drug Mart on Bayfield myself. He didn't open it. He stood there with it in his hand reading the label. Then he put it back. He stood at the counter. He looked at the hallway again. He picked up his phone and made a call that lasted 4 minutes. I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but I could hear his. He said, "It has to be before the deadline." He said, "I understand that." He said, "She's here for another 4 days." He hung up. He stood very still in the kitchen. Then he started making coffee like it was any other morning. I sat on the edge of the tub for a long time. I want to tell you that I immediately called the police, that I did the rational thing. But I want to be honest with you because you deserve the honest version. What I felt in that moment wasn't fear. It was a strange, very cold clarity, the kind that comes when something you suspected but refused to believe becomes something you saw, and under the clarity was something that I am not proud of, which was a kind of quiet fury that had been building since I was 19 years old. I did not call the police that morning. I called my insurance provider and formally locked my beneficiary designation to my university roommate, who was the most trustworthy person I know and who was also named in my will. That took 11 minutes. Then I called a lawyer I found on Google, a woman in Barrie who handled estate and family law. I explained the situation without giving my name. She said, "Document everything." She said, "Do not confront." She said, "Call the police when you have something concrete and not before. Because without a completed attempt, it becomes your word against theirs, and they will say you misunderstood." I said I understood. Then I went downstairs and ate breakfast. That evening, Gerald made drinks. He didn't usually do this. My mother drinks red wine occasionally. I don't drink at all. Brooke was visiting for dinner again. Gerald made some kind of spritzer in a tall glass, brought it to me in the living room with a specific deliberateness, set it down on the coaster next to my hand, and said, "I remember you used to like these." I didn't drink them. I've never liked spritzers. He knows I've been sober for 4 years because my mother told him when I got my chip. He sent me a congratulations text. I still have it. I looked at the glass. Tonic water, lime, Something pink. I didn't touch it. I'm off carbonated stuff lately, I said. Bloating. Thank you, though. He watched me for a second. Something moved behind his eyes. Then Brooke said something about her boyfriend, and his attention shifted, and the moment closed. Later that night, I opened the camera feed. At 9:47 p.m., Gerald came back into the kitchen alone. He took the glass from beside the sink where I'd placed it, the one he'd given me, and he poured the remaining liquid slowly down the drain. He stood at the sink for a moment. Then he rinsed the glass 3 times. You don't rinse a glass 3 times because you're tidy. The next morning was a Sunday. My mother wanted a family breakfast. Brooke came over again. Gerald made eggs and toast, and I noticed that he made a separate pot of coffee and poured a mug for me specifically. Carried it over to the table before I sat down. Set it at my place like it was a kindness. The same smile. I sat down. The mug was in front of me. Brooke was scrolling her phone. My mother was talking about whether her physiotherapy would be covered by her supplemental insurance and what the deductible situation was. And I looked at the coffee and I thought about the glass he'd rinsed 3 times. I thought about the Zoppy clone bottle he'd held in his hand. I thought about the call before the deadline. She's here for another 4 days. I looked at Brooke. She had Gerald's nose and my mother's stubbornness and absolutely no idea what was happening at the table she was sitting at. She'd grabbed a mug of coffee herself from the pot on the counter, the general pot, the one Gerald had made for everyone else, and she was cradling it in both hands with her elbows on the table. Phone balanced against the fruit bowl. I looked at my specific mug, the one Gerald had carried over. I picked mine up. I brought it close to my face like I was inhaling the steam. I made a small sound, something appreciative. Oh, good, I said. Is this the dark roast? I can't do medium in the morning anymore. It doesn't actually wake me up. Gerald looked up. Yeah, he said, a little too quickly. Dark roast. Brooke, I said, turning to her. You should try this. It's so much better. Brooke looked up from her phone with the particular expression of someone who has been offered something they didn't ask for. But there's a specific reflex that Brooke has, that I had watched for 3 days and recognized from 1,000 family gatherings. She does not want what you're offering. But the second you suggest she can't have it, or it's not for her, something shifts. What's wrong with mine? She asked. Nothing, I said. Mine's just better. They're from the same pot. Gerald made mine separately, I said casually, and I watched Gerald's jaw tighten by exactly 1 millimeter. Special request, because I'm his guest. Brooke put her phone down. She looked at Gerald. She looked at my mug. You made her a special coffee? It's just dark roast, Gerald said. His voice was flat. I made extra. Since when do you do special things for her? Brooke said. And she wasn't being hostile so much as reflexively proprietary, the same tone she used when she was 9 and someone else got the front seat. Brooke, my mother said mildly, I'm just saying. Brooke reached across the table. Here's what I want you to understand about that moment. I didn't engineer it. I positioned it. There's a difference. I knew Brooke well enough to know that she would do exactly what she did. I also knew that if Gerald stopped her, he would have to explain why. And if he explained why, this was over before it started. If he didn't stop her, I would have what I needed. I watched Gerald look at Brooke's hand reaching for my mug. I watched the calculation. I watched him weigh his daughter against his deadline. He didn't say anything. Brooke wrapped both hands around my mug and pulled it toward her side of the table. I want to try the good coffee, she said, half laughing, like it was a silly little game. She looked at me with the smugness of someone who has never in her life not gotten the thing she decided she wanted. Don't be stingy. Fine, I said. I let go. It's all yours. My mother was looking at Gerald. She had the expression she gets when she knows something is wrong, but hasn't assembled what it is yet. The same look she used to get when I was a teenager and something in the house wasn't adding up. She started to say something. She pushed her chair back slightly. Gerald put his hand on her arm, not grabbing, not squeezing. Just a hand on her arm, a very firm and specific hand, and a look that I couldn't fully see but my mother could. She went quiet. She looked at Brooke. Something crossed her face. Brooke drank. It wasn't a sip. She took a real mouthful, the way she does everything all the way in, and she made a face. Huh. It's bitter. Acquired taste, I said. My mother made a sound. Gerald's hand tightened on her arm. I stood up from the table. Actually, I said, I'm going to grab my phone. I left it upstairs. I walked to the hallway. I didn't go upstairs. I stood just outside the kitchen doorway, back against the wall, and I pulled out my phone and I opened the camera app. The feed was live. I could see the table. I could see Brooke putting the mug down. I could see Gerald watching her. I could see my mother's hands gripping the edge of the table. I gave it 90 seconds. Then I walked back in. Actually, I said, very calmly, from the doorway, I need everyone to stop moving. Gerald looked at me. Brooke, I said, do you feel okay? She blinked. What? Yeah, why? I need you to tell me exactly how you feel, right now, in detail. She looked at Gerald. She looked at my mother. I feel fine. What is going on? You're being so weird. She wasn't fine yet. That was the thing. What is going on? You're being so weird. She wasn't fine yet. That was the thing. Zopiclone doesn't hit in 2 minutes. I knew that from research I'd done the night before, sitting in my childhood bedroom with my laptop at midnight. It could be 30 minutes. It could be less if the dose was significant. I needed to move faster than the medication. I looked at Gerald. I said, I want to give you one opportunity to tell the truth before I make a phone call. He said nothing. I looked at my mother. Her face had gone the color of the kitchen wall. She was gripping the table. She had known. I understood then. Not all of it. Not the insurance policy inquiry. But she had known something was happening, and she had pushed it down to the place where you push things when the alternative is unbearable. Tell her what's in the coffee, I said to Gerald. There's nothing in the coffee, he said. His voice was completely steady. You're being dramatic. Okay, I took my phone out. I did not call 911. Not yet. I opened the camera app and I turned the screen around so that it faced the table. I pressed play. The kitchen, 7:14 a.m. Gerald at the cabinet above the fridge. The prescription bottle. His hand. His face. The call. Brooke made a sound I've never heard before. Something between a question and a refusal. Gerald stood up. Sit down, I said. The words came out quiet and flat, and I don't fully recognize the voice that produced them as my own. Brooke, how do you feel right now? Answer me. I feel. She stopped. She pressed her fingers to her temple. I feel kind of weird, actually. Like, dizzy? Why do I feel dizzy? I called 911. I told the operator my sister may have been given medication without her knowledge or consent, that I had reason to believe there was Zopiclone in her system, that I had video evidence of the person who prepared the substance, and that I needed paramedics and police at this address immediately. I said it all in the same flat voice while looking directly at Gerald. He didn't run. I want to tell you he ran. He didn't. He sat back down. He looked at the table. He had the expression of a man who had done the math one final time and understood that all the numbers had come out wrong. My mother went to Brooke. She put her arms around her and made a sound I hadn't heard from her in years. Something raw and cracked open, the sound a person makes when they've been holding something for so long that the release isn't relief. It's just damage. Brooke kept asking what was happening. She kept looking at her father. She asked him 3 times. He didn't answer her once. The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. The police came right behind them. I handed the responding officer my phone with the camera feed already queued up, and a second phone with screenshots of the voicemail for my benefits provider, the CRA letters I'd photographed the first night, and a written timeline I typed at midnight in my old bedroom with the boot-shaped water stain on the ceiling. He looked at the documents. He looked at Gerald. He asked Gerald to step outside. Gerald went. Brooke was treated on scene. The level in her system was high enough that the paramedics wanted to take her to Royal Victoria for observation, and she went. My mother rode with her in the ambulance, holding her hand, not letting go. Before she got in, she turned and looked at me across the lawn. I don't know exactly what was in that look. There was grief in it. There was something that was maybe the edge of a question she wasn't ready to finish asking. There was something that looked, briefly, like relief. And I don't know what to do with that yet. Gerald was arrested that afternoon. The charges included administering a noxious substance, criminal negligence, and fraud related to the insurance policy inquiry, which the police subpoenaed the same day. The CRA file became its own separate matter. The house is mortgaged to a degree that makes it unlikely my mother will be able to keep it once Gerald's finances are fully untangled, and that's a grief I don't know how to help her carry yet. We've had 2 real conversations on the phone since I flew back to Calgary. The first one was hard. The second one was slightly less hard. I don't know what the third one will be. Brooke texted me 9 days after. She wrote 4 words. How did you know? I didn't answer right away. I sat with the message for a long time. Then I wrote back. I started paying attention when it was almost too late. I should have started sooner. She didn't respond, but she didn't delete the thread either. I know because it still shows delivered. I think about Gerald a lot. Not with anger mostly. Anger requires a kind of energy that I've stopped being willing to spend on people who were never going to be worth it. What I think about is the smile. The one he gave me when he handed me the mug. How much effort goes into performing warmth you don't feel? How exhausting it must be to live inside a calculation that big, every meal, every room, every hand placed carefully on an arm. I flew back to Calgary on a Tuesday morning. I had a window seat. I watched the province go flat and wide and familiar underneath me. I ordered a ginger ale from the flight attendant and I held the cold can against my palm and I thought, I'm still here. That's the thing nobody tells you about surviving your own family. It doesn't feel like victory. It doesn't feel like entry. It feels like standing up after something knocked you down and noticing, a little surprised, that your legs still work. I changed my phone's lock screen when I landed. It used to be a photo of me and my mother from 3 Christmases ago. The two of us in front of her tree, her arm around my shoulders. Both of us squinting into the flash. I haven't decided what to replace it with yet, so I want to ask you something. If you had been sitting at that table and you had seen what I saw, and you knew what I knew, would you have made the same call? Or would you have knocked the mug out of her hand before she even got close to it? Tell me in the comments. And if someone in your life has ever shown you a kindness that turned out to be something else entirely, share this story. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing at the table isn't what's in the cup. It's who's smiling when they hand it to you. People ask me sometimes if I regret not acting sooner. It's a fair question. I sat in that house for 3 days watching the air shift around me, and I kept finding reasons to wait, to confirm, to be sure. I think part of me needed to be completely certain before I moved, because I had spent years doubting my own instincts in that family. When you grow up being told that your concerns are dramatic, your suspicions are paranoid, your feelings are inconvenient. Eventually, you start running every observation through a second filter before you trust it. That second filter cost me time. It almost cost Brooke something permanent. What I've come to understand is that there's a difference between patience and paralysis. I was patient when I documented. I was patient when I called the lawyer, when I locked my insurance policy, when I bought the camera and waited for confirmation before I acted. That patience was deliberate. It was a choice with a purpose. What I had been doing for the 11 years before that visit, transferring $800 a month, fixing problems that weren't mine to fix, swallowing the discomfort every time Gerald smiled at me the wrong way. That wasn't patience. That was something else. That was the slow erosion of believing my own experience mattered. I think about Gerald sitting at that table after the police arrived. Not running, just sitting. There's a particular kind of collapse that happens to people who have spent years believing they are smarter than the situation they're in. He had built a very elaborate structure. The debt, the insurance inquiry, the deadline, the plan, and every piece of it depended on me being exactly who he had decided I was. Distracted, soft, too grateful for scraps of warmth to notice when the warmth was a tool. The moment I stopped being that person, the whole structure had nothing to hold it up. That's the thing about people who treat you like a resource. They don't update their model of you. They keep running the same calculation because the calculation worked before, and they assume it will keep working. Gerald's mistake wasn't the plan itself. His mistake was assuming I hadn't changed. He was working from 11 years of data and he didn't account for the 4 years of sobriety, the lawyer's number in my phone, the $45 camera from Canadian Tire, or the fact that when you spend enough time being underestimated, you eventually stop trying to correct people's perception of you and start using it. Brooke texted me. 4 words. I still think about that text. How did you know? The honest answer is that I knew because I finally started believing what I was seeing instead of explaining it away. That's not a gift. That's not something I was born with. It's a skill that I built slowly and badly and only after I'd already lost a lot of time to not having it. I don't know what I am to Brooke now. I don't know what she is to me. But she survived. And she testified. And sometimes the first genuinely honest thing a person does is also the hardest, and maybe that counts for something in the long run. I'm willing to leave that open. The lock screen on my phone is still blank. I haven't replaced the photo yet. Some things take longer than you expect to find the right thing to fill them with. I'm not in a rush.